dive into the details of the coffee barometer, please welcome Mr. Sjoerd Panhuysen, Sergio, who is a principal researcher at Ethos Agriculture, bringing 2 decades of experience as an agricultural commodity researcher specialized in the coffee sector. Welcome.
So maybe we wait a few minutes before we start, or shall I just go ahead? All right. Okay. So the coffee barometer. This we just launched the new version, 2023, and before going into the content of the last version, I will explain a little bit where it comes from. Let me see if this works. Yes. So the can test it. Yeah. Test. It seems not to work. Buys us a little bit of time. No worries. Okay, because I have a lot of slides in the beginning that have to go pretty fast. Ah, okay. All right. Okay. All right, we start over again. So the barometer, we started in actually already 2006. This is the 7th edition that we are at in 2023. I never imagined in 2006 that we would still be writing about more or less similar subjects around sustainability in the coffee sector. Over the years, we covered a lot of ground. I think in the beginning it was mainly about percentages of certified coffees being bought by the main coffee roasters. And actually, the focus on the main roasters, that's still the heart of the barometer, because what we really want to look into is, on the one hand, big companies making big claims and promises versus, on the other hand, what do we actually see in practice? What do we see from all these big and bold claims about sustainability in the coffee sector, and what is actually the reality that we see on the ground? So I have a few slides from the history of the coffee barometer. Maybe you recognize some, and this is the last edition. So what we actually do, we try to spotlight the challenges. And why are we trying to do this? That's because of the fact that actually the sector is extremely intransparent if we are starting to look into any of the sustainability issues that this morning were also raised by Andras. We think we have a lot of information about the sector, but as yesterday was also explained, the figure of 25 million farmers had been around with us for years and years and is quoted everywhere, while actually a reality is that we have 12.5 million farmers. Another question that's not answered yet is how many workers are actually active in the coffee sector? We don't know. We have figures from like, yes, 1.5 million in Indonesia, 1.5 million in Vietnam, but actually we do not know the details, which is quite strange, no? If you want to address any labor issue, but you don't know how many people are working in your sector, it's really hard to come up with solutions. So these type of questions we ask and we try to highlight in the barometer. So the first part is actually making the connections. What we see in the coffee sector is an ongoing concentration. If we talk about the coffee sector, we often present like, yes, there are 50 or even more than 50 countries producing coffee, but if you really zoom into it, there's like, of course, this morning was presented Brazil, yes, 40% of the global coffee. Vietnam, 20%, and then we have Colombia, Honduras, Ethiopia maybe, bringing together 25%. So what's left for all these other countries? That's really a tiny share of the export market. What it also means is that a lot of the funding and a lot of the efforts are going exactly into the big coffee producing countries or their regions, which means that there is less time, less capacity, less funding available for countries that might actually really need the support. And there's a danger, and what we also discussed in some of the other presentations is the whole question about climate change. If we put all our eggs in one basket, in 10, 20 years, the world it will look different, and it's not very smart to push the coffee sector only in the largest producing regions at the moment, because there are so many challenges. Next, yes. So one of these big challenges that has come to the fore and is now on everybody's table to discuss is the question around coffee income versus living income. How feasible is it actually to make a living income from coffee? Recent research of Columbia University looks at 10 countries and actually came to the conclusion only one country, it's not surprising, Brazil, there it's possible for farmers to make at least a living income from producing coffee. Of course, I would not recommend any farmer, and in reality most farmers do have a very diversified income stream, to try to live only from their coffee, but at the same time, farmers have a choice. And if coffee is not an economical viable choice, why stay in coffee? And that's what we see in a couple of countries, is actually, and I think Central America is a very good example, people moving out of coffee. And we were just visiting the plantation of Ecom, and one of the issues is also, yes, labor is really one of the big challenges. So if we cannot pay sufficiently to our workers, well, who's going to pick the coffee? Another challenge, and also related to our field visit, the whole idea of as much production as possible per hectare that has been pushed now for decades, and still I do see often the examples of, if you go into Africa or the countries, like, yes, we need to produce like Vietnam, or we need to produce like Brazil. But these high input type of agriculture is really reaching its boundaries, and that's also what we see with the whole story around climate change, and we need to figure out how to manage the microclimate in coffee regions. And of course, one of the options is to move more into the direction of regenerative agriculture, agroforestry systems, but there's a long way to go. If we look at Brazil, well, you can see it on my slide. It's just a tiny part is grown under shadow, and of course the industry is not really convinced yet that it's necessary to move into a more ecological and environmentally viable system. Also, on the slides, it shows we don't even know yet what we're up to. For example, Ethiopia, we do not have very reliable figures. So again, and the Coffee Research Institute also highlighted this yesterday, there's a huge gap between, yes, we know there are problems, but how are we going to address those problems, and what data do we actually need to really move forward? Another element, and the last one in connecting some of these challenges, is we've been experimenting with voluntarily certification and asking the private sector, or the private sector itself, investing in voluntary standards, with the idea that we can address the different elements of sustainability and environmental, social, and economic. What we do see in recent years actually is a sort of reverse movement where, on the one hand, yes, most of the known systems, including fair trade and Rainforest Alliance, yes, they are still expanding and growing, but as you see on the slide, actually the absorption of the market, or the procurement of these coffees under the specific standards, and that means that a premium is being paid, or support programs are being provided, it seems to have hit a glass ceiling, and that's up to the contour of the industry at large. If we have, on the one hand, more than 50% of global coffee adhering to one of these standard systems, and on the other hand, an industry that only absorbs 25% of this certified coffee under the specific terms of trade, yeah, that's a huge gap, and not really for a farmer interesting, or to be convinced to actually try out any of these standard systems, or try to be part of that. Moving on, as I touched already upon, there are a couple of leading roasters in the world. We focused in this barometer on the top 10, and we ended up with a top 11 because it was difficult to really stick to the top 10. But there's a couple of roasters that together are, somehow roasting 35% of the global coffee. And, well, as you see, they are all familiar names, household names, and they have all their brands and coffee corners all around the world. What we asked a very simple question, actually. Can we make sense of the policies and practices of these companies if we only look at their sustainability information that is available in the public domain? And actually this is the end result, and we have a website that gives all kind of details, and you can go as deep as you want into every company's ins and outs about what they are saying about sustainability and what they are doing and what they are claiming. Of course, when we published this, Nestlé immediately sent out a press release, we are the best, and I don't think that is the message of this barometer. It's more like, look at if these are the top 11 and more than half of, let's say, 9 out of 11 companies do not really have a very mature, complete policy and practices on sustainability, we can discuss for a long time all the things that we are discussing here, but if these leading companies have not even cracked the nut, then it's really, yeah, I would say worrying. Some details. So we looked at, for example, the social strategies of companies, and what we found actually is that most companies do not really have measurable goals in their reports or in their plans. What they often refer to is, well, we have a foundation, and the foundation is doing this project and doing that project, and it's all very interesting, but it's not a very cohesive idea or a strategy that is shared. If you would like to know a bit more about what are actually those social strategies of these companies, you cannot find more than, well, we have a project in Costa Rica, and we have a couple of projects in Vietnam and a project in Uganda. Yes, that's great, but what is your vision? What is your strategy? Where are you moving towards? What do you want to, what are you contributing? And that's another big issue. We asked every company, could you give us an indication of your investments in sustainability at large in all your activities? None of the 11 companies shared that information. So my interpretation is, or they don't know, or they don't want us to know, or it's such a low figure that they are maybe a little ashamed to share that. If we look at environmental strategies, it looks a little better. And especially, I think, because of all the international developments around targets for, well, how do I address climate change? How do I address carbon insetting, offsetting, and more possibilities are available there, and that's what we also see back in the maturity of a lot of the companies in policies on what are we doing on environmental issues. On the other hand, we still miss a lot of good practices, for example, on cut-off dates on deforestation. I think 9 out of, or maybe 8 out of the 11 companies do not include that type of good practices in their policies yet. So the real worrying part is probably the strategies around economics. And of course, that's where a lot of our discussion starts. If it's not economically viable to be in coffee or to produce in a more sustainable way, what are we talking about now? So for almost all of these companies, it was really, really hard to find any trace of policies and practices around their procurement and then related to sustainability goals. For example, on the one hand, a lot of companies are talking about, yes, we are interested in living wages, we are interested in living income benchmarks, but if we translate that interest to their policies, we do see like, okay, but there's nothing in their policies around farmer profitability, like working towards a living income in coffee-producing regions. There's no intention, or at least not in any of the documents that we found, of companies saying, well, we are going to try this. We are going to try to pay the differentials or the gaps or whatever. So that's really an area where I think in the next couple of years we really need to move forward fast, because if this element of the simple economics is not addressed, and as we just saw with the living income differential that is in a lot of countries actually leading to coffee being seen as a poverty crop, that's not where you want to go as a sector, because that makes it really hard also to bring in the next generation, because most coffee farmers that I meet and speak, they are not very enthusiastic about their children moving into coffee. So this is really an area, of course, it's uncomfortable for a lot of companies to discuss this. It's far easier to discuss subjects that we agree upon, like, yes, we need to address child labor, but we need to address the root causes. We can discuss a lot of the sustainability challenges, but if we do not want to address the root causes, and I think the economical part is a root cause, and price is also an element of that. That being said, I think it's important also to notice that, yes, we checked the reports, we checked the available data. We have not been able to really go into the field and see what's the impact of all these policies and practices. So we have not been able to check actually if all the interesting things Starbucks is claiming in its reports is also, can we find it in practice? Maybe next time. So then, of course, a lot of the issues that we are discussing are far too big for any company to address on their own. So we also looked at the individual contributions, but then linked to collective actions and multi-stakeholder platforms. The next one, yes. So what we do see, if we look at the 11 companies, most of them are somehow linked to at least one multi-stakeholder platform that is really focusing on making the sector more sustainable. And yeah, we focused here on Global Coffee Platform, the Public-Private Task Force of the ICO, and the Sustainable Coffee Challenge of Conservation International. Of course, the question that comes up is, on the one hand, these companies are contributing to a lot of the problems that we highlight and face. At the same time, they also have to be part of the solution or to push for the solution. And then there's also the question, who's funding all of this? And who's then setting the agenda? I don't have answers to all of these questions, but we raise some of these issues to keep that in mind. What's also interesting to see is that some companies are not taking part in any of these discussions, and there I can single out two big US players, Smuckers and Kraft Heinz. And actually, I find it quite surprising, maybe also a bit intriguing, that if we look at the American or the US market, there are only 4 companies that together have 70% of the market, and those include Starbucks, GDE, Smuckers, and Kraft Heinz. And if 2 of those 4 companies are not even taking part in any of the international discussions around sustainability, that's also, I would say, worrying, because in the end, we would expect all these companies to seriously invest and also look forward. If they want to be in business, they will need coffee, no? That's a very simple relationship, but the question is indeed, are companies actually willing to absorb any of the costs that are part of, well, making the sector more sustainable, investing in long-term sustainability? Because I think it's also a question, we need to make the investments at this moment, because coffee being there for quite some 5 years, 10 years, 30, 20, 30 years, we really need to think about, okay, what do we need to do at this moment to be prepared for 2030, 2040, 2050? Because looking at scary climate change maps, we can already see that 45% of the area where currently Arabica is being produced is not going to be, potentially not going to be a viable area in 25 years from now. Same goes for Robusta, where 25% of the current Robusta area might not be really, it might not be possible to grow coffee there anymore in 25 years. So these are very big questions, big issues, and somehow they are not sufficiently addressed by these multi-stakeholder initiatives yet. Another one, and I touched upon it already, I think there are a lot of uncomfortable topics that are not on the agenda, and I think one of them is a very clear topic, is price. If we look at the global coffee sector at large, like I think around 85% of the farms are less than 2 hectares, and it's really the conventional wisdom in the sector is pushing for this story, like, yes, we need to produce more per hectare, but even making a very simple calculations of more production per hectare doesn't actually automatically mean that you will go towards sufficient income, because if price is too low, if the price is not connected to your production price, then it becomes a very hard job to continue producing coffee. I think some of the other difficult issues, and I started with one of them, is of course, okay, how to deal with labor in the coffee sector. Are we actually able to pay incomes to laborers that can compete with other sectors, or is it really becoming more or less really a challenge and really difficult in a lot of countries to find sufficient labor? So a lot of these topics really need to come on the table and need to be part of our discussions in sustainability. And then, of course, we have heard quite a lot about it in the last days. The area at the time that we are now in is actually quite interesting from a research perspective also, I would say. We see a push for mandatory due diligence, so international legislation. Of course, the EU, it's a very clear example, and it's taking now the lead in developing this type of legislation. But I haven't heard yet that it's not only the EU, working on this type of legislation. It's also the US is working on similar types of legislation. Even China is looking into, okay, what is the EU actually doing in this respect? And so there's this tendency that, okay, the private sector at large, and that's not coffee specific, it's the private sector at large, it's necessary to move yes, we tried it voluntarily to solve all these issues in supply chains. Well, that's clearly not working. So we're going to try it in a different way and move to mandatory legislation. What's interesting here is also, I think, the position the coffee industry is taken. I do think it's not very proactive. I would have expected a far more active involvement of the coffee sector. It's not that any of these things suddenly came out of the blue air. And I think the example of the European Union's deforestation regulation is, of course, one of them, and it's a very clear example because, as was presented by the ECF, yes, it's already on paper. It's more or less, it's not set in stone yet, but there will be consequences for the sector, and that's very clear. At the same time, that's not the only legislation that we have. Actually, when we started with doing the research around all the reporting of companies, we actually expected a relatively easy task because there's also the corporate sustainability reporting directive that actually asks companies starting from 2024 already to really be very clear about, okay, what are you doing to ensure sustainability at large within your supply chain. And just to give an example, from the 11 companies that we interviewed, I think 4 or 5 of them did not even publish a sustainability report by May or June of last year. Imagine if you are not publishing your financial report, what will happen, no? And that is a bit, sustainability is still not taken seriously enough at that level, and with this type of legislation, at least I think, or I hope, that our job will be a little easier in the next edition, that at least these companies will have to provide information and will have to go into detail and share, for example, measurable goals. Anyway, the timeline, it looks like a very long line, but from here, we are already almost in 2024 now. It's in 2-3 years, this whole discussion will be completely different. I think that's something to keep in mind. To conclude, I try to give a very broad overview of our research. Our research is available on the Coffee Barometer website. It's free, so no worries, just download it. You can also look at our website where we really provide for every individual company a complete assessment in PDF format, so you can check if we have done our work sufficiently, and you can really go into the nitty-gritty details there. Maybe last but not least, we are working on the Spanish translation of the barometer, and I suppose that will be ready somewhere early December as an early Christmas gift. So we will upload it on our website, and then it's also available for all of you and accessible. And I hope you can share it with farmers, with farmer communities, because I think it's an important discussion to have. It's not, we really want to move away from actually trying to find any of the solutions for making the sector more sustainable at farm level, while probably a lot of the solutions are at the table of some of these multinationals. I liked the yesterday's introduction with is it me or is it you? I would say it's clearly you in this respect, and it's clearly on the table of GDE, it's clearly on the table of Nestle, Smuckers, and all of the others to really take action now and to really put your money where your mouth is, because we cannot find it in your report. Thanks.